Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody who's either walking past and wants to listen or who's here. So I'm Colin Parry. I am the CEO of the International Securities Services Association. And what we do is we do what SIBOS does. We connect people. We use those connections to make change. And we do that through collaborating across a number of working groups. So that's what we do. If I can just ask the panelists to introduce themselves. If we start to my left, Mark.
Yep, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Jem. I work for Clearstream. I'm also on the board of SWIFT, and I head up the European CSD Association. Worked with ESA now on various topics for about the last 10 years.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Vivek. I'm with TCS, Tata Consultancy Services. I head our BFSI products and platforms business. Good to see you all.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Margaret Harwood-Jones, and I'm the Global Head of Financing and Security Services at Standard Chartered, and I'm also on the board of ISA.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Haruna Jallo Waziri. I'm the CEO for the CSD in Nigeria called CSCS. I just recently joined the board of ISA. I've been working on the operating committee for some time. I'm glad to be here and good to see you all.
Hi, I'm Juliet Cannell. I work for SWIFT. I actually run the standards department, so this is my team welcoming you all to the Standards Forum. And ISA I've been involved with for about 6 years now, and particularly looking at ISO 28022, and I chair the operating committee of ISA.
Okay, so thank you for attending. And Margaret, I'm going to start with you. Standard Chartered are well represented at the ISA working groups, but we focus on standardization working group. What is the purpose and the scope of the standardization working group?
Thank you, Colin. So look, this working group's purpose is very much to focus on the standardization journey of our participants. So understanding both the challenges and also the opportunities that are available so that we're best able as ISA to offer practical guidelines and advice. And we believe, and our intention is to ensure that we have a positive impact on the security services on the post-trade space. Now, as you might imagine, when we use a word like standardization, it's a pretty broad agenda, or can be, so it covers a lot of things. And what we're trying to do is think about overall industry standardization as well as individual local market practice. So in scope, the topics that are under consideration include DLT standards, ESG standards, ISO 20022, API standards, and also the data standards that are not covered under any other topic. So it's pretty broad. It's therefore pretty important that as a working group, we're reviewing the very specific areas and we're focusing on what our audience is looking for. So the plan is to make sure as well that we adopt a very agile approach. That will ensure that we focus sufficiently on a specific area before we move on. And in addition to this primary focus, we're also making sure that we're engaging with others that are looking at this topic, which is making sure then that we don't duplicate or we don't miss opportunity to work. So that's very much the intention, Colin.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. We're going to come on to DLT and ISO 20022 later. But the first topic that you're tackling within the standards group is environmental, social, and governance standards. Can you tell us where you are with that piece of work?
Look, it's a great one to start with, and being very honest and open with this group, we're still very much at the early stages. We've already had some good discussion on the specific scope that we should pick up on, and a lot of sharing of information across the working group participants. As you probably understand, in itself, it's also a broad topic. There is a huge amount of complexity, quite a lot of unknowns, and we're also conscious that other parts of the industry are also examining this topic. We don't think it's a topic that has a quick and easy answer, so it is going to take quite a lot of work. So we've decided to break the topic into two phases. So the first phase is very much around education and level set, making sure that certainly our starting point is pretty consistent across the working group. And then secondly, we'll move on to think about the impact of the opportunities, really assess what the problem statement might be, and then we'll move forward from there. We haven't yet defined if there'll be a phase 3 or a phase 4, but I guess as we move through phase 1 and phase 2, that will become more apparent. So very specifically in scope 1, in phase 1, and where we are now, that's really an exploration of what is the whole concepts of ESG. Are we speaking the same language when we look at this? We're also going to take time to think about the flows. So when we look at the participation and the role that each player plays in the service chain across the investment life cycle, to document that clearly, and that's again about ensuring that there is clarity in the way that we begin to explore that conversation more fully. Our expectation then in scope 2 or in phase 2, the scope will start to look at maybe how the industry sees those current challenges, if there are already pain points that have developed even inadvertently, and we will then begin to assess perhaps some of the solutions that exist today, and as importantly, the things that we need to turn our attention to for the future. And as we go, we also want to be cognizant that there are a lot of differences geographically. And I guess for me, in representing a bank that has a deep footprint in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, I'm very conscious that a lot of the early thinking is much more in the West, in Europe, and in the US. And I think it's pretty important that we can learn from some of those early evolutions in that part of the world and see how we can sensibly translate them across to other parts of the world. So I want to leave the piece, I guess, to be fairly fluid, Colin, because I don't think it's a topic that we can say is already fully defined through its phases. But I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of how we're starting to tackle it.
It does indeed. Haruna, if I can move to you, please. So CSCS are a large contributor to domestic CSD working group. Can you explain why your team are dedicating so much time to this working group?
Thank you, Colin. For us at CSCS, coming out of Nigeria is a developing market, as you know. Standards become very important because when investors transit from one market to the other within the EU or in North America or in other developed markets, because the standards are very much there, so it's easy for them to do business. But coming to where we are in Nigeria, we got to set up those or meet those standards so that when a client transits from any of the continents or any of the areas coming into Nigeria or within the domestic CSD group, it becomes easier for them to do business, which is why a few of us are here actually from my team that made sure that we were engaged and brought in other smaller CSDs to come in and share their experiences or get to share or learn from the experiences of others so that when we write our own standards, it's best practice and it cuts across borders. And secondly was that we felt also as a CSD in Nigeria, again, a developing market, we needed to also understand particularly what we needed to do as an institution to build the capacities that are required for us to attract more investors. Hence, you saw quite a bit of our team members across during that period working hand in hand. And again, because we also experienced some of those things in terms of work from home, resilience, especially when COVID came, and we want to share that experience with others as well. So yes, that's why we were there.
Great, thank you very much. And those CSDs involved are not only in Africa, but all the way from Chile around to Thailand and everywhere between. So it's great to see that whole team working very well. The present focus is on due diligence questionnaires. And I know this always makes people worry, but there are at least 3 different due diligence questionnaires out there. The AFME one, the ACG one, and maybe you can see, think IOSCO's PMFI is similar, as well as what's going on with CSDR in Europe as well. But the problem, I guess, is that there are multiple formats and multiple sets of questions, and the teams and CSDs around the world are answering those in various different ways. The World Forum of CSDs, which, as you said, you represented on the operating committee, has a single disclosure project, which so far hasn't made much headway. Do you think that ISA should work with the WFC and other bodies to try and increase the uptake, or change a single disclosure agreement?
So the quick answer is yes. Colin, if you remember when I first joined the operating committee, when the working groups were talking about a few of the issues that had to affect the CSDs at that time, one of the things I said to you was we have to put the CSDs and ESA side by side and begin to look at what are these commonalities that we have and what are the commonalities so that we can begin to have one channel of disclosure standards, if you like, and then the collaboration so that investors or if you like, others would have to have that clear path of understanding of what they need to do, have one channel, and it makes life a lot easier. Now, in the morning, I was in one of the panels that I was listening to, was talking about quantum internet, and the issue always was around how do you democratize, KYC information and all of that, because if you do that, what happens is, there is a less path of resistance for transaction cycles to quickly end, to start and end. So for me, I think it's the right thing to do. I think ESA should be active in it, and we need to facilitate that to happen at the WFC level. And again, it just makes life easier for everyone.
Thank you very much, Sharina. So again, that's the end of that segment. Are there any questions about what's happening with the CSDs and the standardization we're trying to drive there for the small CSDs? Oh, yeah, please. I'm going to bring so I can get up, actually.
So, Haruna, congratulations for implementing standards in Nigeria. There's a lot of congratulations for that. Now, in terms of CSDs in Europe and US and other developed markets, do you think there are depositories who are following enough standards? And if not, what would be your message to them?
So I think I was talking to Bill yesterday around exactly what they were doing. So let's take, for example, the transition between T+2 to T+1, the conversations that CSDs are having across the channel. You would find out that what's happening in Europe is different from what's happening in the US or what's happening in Asia, and especially what's happening, in developing markets. But I see more and more the necessity of having to bring the CSDs together, whether it's the World Forum of CSDs, and begin to look at how we can agree across channels, certain transitions that should occur. We started talking about T+1 in Nigeria, and some of the custodians are here. I can tell you the kind of discussions we're having with them towards getting that to be done. So I think across channels, there has to be some systems that have to be agreed across. Now, there will be issues around legacy technology. Should we wait 3 years? Should we wait 5 years before we do it? If you ask me, coming from a developed market where we don't have legacy issues, that quantum leap should happen now. Yep. Otherwise, my son, who is probably 22 this month, or next month actually, I ask him every day, why are you not playing in our equity market? He said, Dad, I'm sorry, I can't wait 3 days to buy something and get the assets or have control over it in 3 days. That if he buys from Amazon in the morning, it can be delivered in the evening. Why can't we do the same thing? So, and if you look at the world population in terms of developed markets where there are new things happening, what you will see is that more and more there are younger people in the population taking over things, and if we do not deliver the services in the way they know it from an instant gratification, purpose, then we will lose out. So the answer is, let's do it now, let's do it quickly.
Which is actually a perfect segue into my first plug for the ISA Symposium, which has got a session on are the emerging markets now leading, which I think is exactly what the opportunity is by jumping that generation and making that quantum leap. So that's great. Thank you. In which case, Mark, turning to you, quite literally. The FCC principles and resulting questionnaire could be said to be one of the biggest standardizations that ISA has undertaken. Would you agree with this characterization, and what drove the approach?
Well, yes, I would. So FCC stands for Financial Crime Compliance. And don't worry, we're not here to talk about compliance. But Colin, you mentioned at the beginning that there are two basic ways, or perhaps three basic ways of understanding standardization. There's standardization in the sense of substitutability of parts, compatibility of supply chains. So I'm one of these people who thinks that the shipping container has probably done more to add to the stock of human happiness than any other innovation. And that's simply because they're all exactly the same size, right? And that's one level of standardization. And we kind of mean that when we talk about 20022 versus 15022 or whatever. But then there's standards in the sense of behavior, conduct, norms. Are you conducting yourself to the standard that is expected? And then there is the question of standards in the sense of quality. Are we meeting the standard? Are we delivering to the necessary level of quality? Now, what the financial crime compliance journey was a response to the financial crime regulators in the United States, not just OFAC. This was also coming at us from the perspective of money laundering. There had been a couple of enforcement actions, both of which looked at the consequences of depositories and sub-custodians and global custodians not knowing the identity of the investors and the holders of instruments in the system. And we were told, as an industry, sort yourselves out or we will regulate. This was back in 2012, 2013, 2014. And Adam Zubin, who at that time was the director of OFAC, he stood up literally right here at the ESA Standards, what is this? The ESA Standards panel, Meet ESA at SIBOS. He stood right there, except it was in Toronto, and said, sort it out, or we will force you into what we think is the solution. So we got together at ESA, and we went down to Wolfsburg in the middle of winter, and there were I see a couple of you who are on that journey. We clanked around this, if you've been to Wolfsburg in Switzerland, this old UBS management training center, an old chateau, and we clanked around in the fog in November. It was damp, and it was like being on a ship that had run out of fuel and was just drifting listlessly in the sea. And you were there, Bill, and you were there, Giles. And we sat there, and we wrote these principles. But before we wrote the principles, and you can check them out, they're on the website, they're mandatory KYC documents now for most custody, sub-custody relationships. But before we get to the principles, we had a much more fundamental question to answer, which was, do we go standards in the sense of data structure and go data rich, get everyone to pass all the investor, buyer, seller information up and down the chain so everyone can screen it against lists and set ourselves up to do that as efficiently as possible to scale the industry, okay? That was option one. Let's think about that. At Clearstream, we have, to give you an idea, we have something like 20,000, 25,000 accounts belonging to something like 2,500 customer institutions. So we'd be talking about scaling that to somewhere between maybe 100 and 250 million accounts, right? And we would lose the benefit of downstream intermediation, meaning all transactions would rise up to the upper tier. We would lose all sorts of benefits of inclusion, financial inclusion, because it would mean people would not have choice of provider. They'd always be exposed to the monopolist CST. So, but that wasn't what we focused on. We said, why would we throw these huge volumes of data, spend millions and millions on figuring out which field code to put it on, how they could be tuned to screening systems, how could we maintain cycle times, what we would do when there was a hit, how many people would we have to put in the KYC factories around all of our organizations to deal with that? And we didn't know the answer. because this was before Giles worked for you, Vivek. I'm sure nowadays he would argue, but actually he did argue then. He said, no. You want lots of data in big piles. You just need to source it in a standardized way. Maybe that would have worked, Giles, but that's not what we did. What we said is, let's trust each other instead. Let's hold ourselves to a certain standard of behavior. Let's make that contractual. And so what are the principles that govern that conduct? That I know that, or Bill knows at DTCC, that I, in Clearstream, I'm not going to write business on a US security that's going into Bill that Bill wouldn't write himself. And that is what underpins the ESA standards. So this was a great standardization exercise, but it was a standardization of behavior, of conduct, and it was about building trust between all of us as intermediaries. And we avoided, we think, a massive technical standardization exercise that would have cost billions and made our industry far less efficient. So, answer, yes.
I'm not even going to answer that. so the next question is, okay, so we've got the questionnaire out there. It's on the SWIFT registry. People are using it all around the world, which is all great. But what's the next step for the financial crime compliance working group, and what are you focused on for the next year?
Well, ESA's always been most successful when it sets stable standards that act as a core reference for the industry for years. When we first looked at this, I think as one of the symposiums in Wolfsburg, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago, and we said, what is the value that we add as ESA to the community? We discovered that the most popular document at that time on our website were the risk management principles from 1993. So the first thing that we must do with the financial crime compliance principles is to maintain them, maintain the support for them, such as the SWIFT KYC registry, such as the disclosure frameworks, make sure that they are updated, make sure that that trust of the community, the trust of the correspondent banks through Wolfsburg is maintained, make sure that the trust of the regulatory authorities, of the sanctions enforcement authorities, of the security supervisors are maintained. So in other words, just keep it right, keep it suitable. The second thing we're focusing on is, as you would expect, given the geopolitical situation, the sanctions, because sanctions have evolved a long way since 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when we did this, there were no sanctions that were specific to securities. Virtually all of the sanctions that have come about in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are securities related. You can't issue debt for more than this period. You can only handle debt issued before that date. You can only provide access to the CSD for products which have been issued before that date. You can only do this if it's raining. You can only do this if it's a Thursday. All very, very calibrated rules around security. So we're saying, how can we help these representation structures, that I won't do business that you won't do, unless we calibrate it to those sorts of measures. So we're thinking about that, how we can communicate the posture that each of us has, the level of maturity that each of us has against those very complex programs that are coming from many, many different countries, in a way that will help the industry reduce the pain levels, reduce the operating frictions that we have around that. We're also considering whether we look into the question, and we haven't got there yet, of money laundering typologies that involve securities. Particularly, the regulators, the supervisors come at us and they say, you've got to look at anomalous transactions. You've got to look at anomalous patterns. Now, if you're running a retail bank where you have a retail customer who gets a salary, the credit card bill comes in, the mortgage goes out, the utility bills go out, a little bit of shopping, a little bit of restaurant, then the salary comes in and the cycle restarts. If that customer gets a credit for $1 million, well, that's pretty obviously an anomaly. But what do you do with us, where we have high volume, intermediated accounts commingling the decisions of multiple investors?
Absolutely.
Even a proprietary account of a bank customer. Maybe that's reflecting decisions of different trading desks who are maybe segregated by Chinese walls. So we'll see nominally anomalous decisions there. So we're looking much more, look at the product, look at the security, because you would expect transactions in a given security, a given icing code, to be homogeneous, right? You wouldn't expect people to be making fundamentally different decisions and patterns of behavior. So, if we're all settling a given bond at T+1, and Margaret's settling it at T+60, and we're all settling for 50,000 nominal on average, and she's doing it for 50 million, well, maybe we should take a closer look at Margaret. So we're thinking about bringing out typologies there, but we're also very conscious. We don't want to go too diffuse. We want to maintain the core, maintain what ESA has always been good at, which is a standard the market can refer to for decades to come, and keep that up to date and suitable for the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the floor on financial crime compliance and what's happening there? So Vivek, moving on to yourself, you sponsor the distributed ledger technology working group, and the market is moving at a phenomenal pace, and changes are continually occurring. We explored that in the panel we did yesterday. ISRA published the revised DLT asset identifier matrix earlier this year, and to paraphrase the conclusion, that there is no right answers, but here are some of the options that the association members might like to use. So it's unlike anything else we'd ever written in ISA, and we just left the members to do the thinking for themselves. Do you think ISA can operate in its traditional manner in this arena, and what can we do to bring value?
So, first of all, it's a question of how you define traditional manner. But I think there's an opportunity to be a lot more proactive, and over a period of time, maybe a little bit prescriptive also. Right? I think only then the standards will fall in place. If you take DLT, the transaction chain is going to be very different from what the transaction chain is in our current transactions in the conventional way. So you cannot not have standards at this juncture. I mean, you can wait for all of this to get messed up, and then, like he said, get together in one wintry evening in November near Zurich after another 10 years. But what happens meanwhile, right? It just makes the whole implementation process complex, makes the adoption process complex. So I think if you look at the DLT working group at ESA, there's incredible participation. It's one of our most exciting groups. There's an opportunity to set and drive this standard, and I think the market needs it. Without these standards, you cannot implement fast. You cannot integrate and interoperate easily. I think Haruna was talking about what kind of interoperability is needed, globally. Now this is the right time. I think instead of waiting for 3 years, 5 years, I think this is the time for us to take more initiative, be more active, reach out to a wider array of stakeholders, and set these standards and drive it. And if that's the traditional way, it's okay, but that's the way. Traditional or not traditional, that's the way to go about it.
Okay, no, that is both traditional and untraditional, I guess. So you talked briefly there about interoperability, and the panel I was doing yesterday with the digital asset guys, they were basically saying interoperability is an evil word, effectively, and we should let the best solution win. Do you agree with that, or do you think we should aim to make sure that we can interoperate between standards?
I don't agree with that.
Good, because otherwise I'll throw you off the stand.
Yeah, exactly. I don't agree with that, because it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a jungle thing. If you say let the best one win, right? I don't think we can take that approach because it will be incredibly expensive. And in today's world where, I mean, I'm not just here with other ESA board members, they're also our customers. I mean, people want things to be implemented really fast, in a few months, not in a few years. You want it to interoperate smoothly. You don't want to put different fit-for-purpose solutions for each customer, for each market, for each region in the world. If you are willing to do that, then you can say, let the best one win, and who is to decide which is the best one? Who decides that? I mean, then everybody will say that what I'm doing is the best one. So I think this is the time, and this is the time to do it, not wait for a few years. And then Mark will be sitting with Giles and Bill and others in one evening in Zurich. No, right now.
I'm looking forward to it, Charles.
Juliet, my favorite topic. So, Giles again, actually, Juliet run the ISO 28022 working group for ISA. I work as a secretariat, so I've learned more about ISO 28022 than I thought I'd ever know. But can you explain what ISA's doing now with ISO 28022 and what the successes have been?
Okay, so maybe before explaining what we're going to do, I think probably need just to spend like a minute giving some context because it will explain what we're doing now. So I don't know if all of you know, but about 2 years ago, Giles and I put together a questionnaire with the ISA membership, which we sent out, and the idea was really to assess the appetite for a migration to ISO 20022. And we got super response, and if I had to summarize the response in maybe 3 bullet points, the first would be, right now there's no huge appetite for an industry-wide migration to ISO 20022. If we're going to spend energy looking at this, actually what we should be doing is focusing on interoperability, which is why I was happy you said you agreed. Not just at the syntax level, meaning not just between 15022, FPML, FIX, and ISO 20022, not just on those things, but also looking at some of the newer technology like APIs. Because I think someone said on the panel, we do have a tendency to wait for things to go really, really wrong before we go in.
Yes.
And actually, I think APIs is another example of where things are beginning to diverge, we're beginning to see fragmentation, and perhaps we need to get our arms around it. So they told us to focus on that. And then the last thing they said was, well, we all talk about ISO 20082, but we're not all really sure what it is or even why we should adopt it, which was kind of a bit of a lesson learned, I think, for anyone that works at Swift. So there needed to be more education. So that's what we heard. So what have we done about it? I'll take education first because that's kind of the easiest one. We've created a page on the ISA website where we've collected articles, videos, use cases, all sorts of things that talk about ISO 20082 benefits. And actually, I was reading last week, Mike Tagai, you wrote a fantastic paper on APIs and on ISO 20082. That's exactly the kind of stuff that we would like to have on our website so everyone can read it. So that's something we've done and something we want to keep doing. On the interoperability front, we actually had a little bit of a spin-off working group. And what we did there was we decided where are we going to focus first, because it's a huge topic. SNR, settlement and reconciliation, got put to the side quite quickly because kind of STP rates are quite high. Corporate actions homed in on that fairly quickly. And again, where could APIs add value? The group have just published first findings on the website, and I believe next week there's a call on what do we do next about that. Giles and I are having discussions about whether or not we should perhaps even completely relook at corporate actions as a space, transform it rather than just do like for like, something we need to discuss at the ISA level. So that work is ongoing. And then on the last piece, of course, is we did the survey 2 years ago. We know it's time for the next survey. So we're planning to do survey number 2 in Q1 next year. This time round, EXTA and also the ECB have read the survey and have given us input. So we're going to be surveying the industry again to see if appetite for ISO 20082 has changed, and more to come, I guess. We'll see what the results are.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So just to reiterate that slightly subtle call for arms, if people have within their firms or know from other people good ISO 20022 educational material, please send that through to me. We'll put it onto the website. There is a whole reference library of good reading for those people who are interested in ISO 20022, and it's going to only get better with more input. So thank you for that. So the questions, are there any questions for ISO 20022 and what we're doing there? I'm sitting in a Swift booth. That's very scary, actually.
It's scary.
It's scary. Margaret, you look like, do you want to say something?
Nope.
No? Just thought you were going to ask me a question. In which case, if there are no further questions, I guess it's time to
It's Vicky.
oh,
that all
sorry, Vicky. Oh,
Vicky, you've got a question.
No.
No, she hasn't.
that's unfair. So can I just say thank you very much to the panelists for their input. If people would like to join any of the working groups you've heard now, all the other working groups which we're also running, please let myself or Karen Zeeb know, and we can add you to those working groups. They are fun, they are educational, and the great thing is we come up with some excellent output for the industry, but it only really works if the industry inputs into those working groups, so we get the widest possible set of opinions, because that helps us get to the right answer at the time. So thank you to my panelists.
And you get a head start when you're in there.
You do.
Right?
Education as well,
Yeah.
straight up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vivek. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.